On September 13, 2019, the burnt skeletal remains of a female child were discovered by a dog walker near a softball complex across from Smyrna Middle School in Smyrna, Delaware. It was estimated that her remains had been there for weeks at minimum. The identity of the remains was not initially determined. It had been estimated that the unidentified child was either Caucasian or Hispanic, between the ages of 2 to 5 years old, and had slightly wavy brown hair. The case garnered major attention in media and public discourse because of the child's status as an unidentified person and for the initial lack of suspects in the case. The unidentified child was nicknamed Baby L by law enforcement and the public until her identification. She did not match any missing person reports in the state. In October 2020, the child was identified as Emma Grace Cole, the 3-year-old daughter of Christy Lynn Haas and Joshua Douthit. Soon after, on October 12, Christy and her husband, Brendan Haas, were arrested on charges of child abuse. In May 2021, Christy and Brendan were re-indicted, with Delaware Attorney General Kathy Jennings announcing that murder charges had been added for Christy. Specific details of the abuse that Emma had endured were revealed, allegedly at the hands of Christy and Brendan. According to the indictment, Emma was tortured by Christy and Brendan for periods between January 2018 and September 2019. The indictment alleges that the couple deprived Emma of food, tortured her, endangered her welfare, deprived her of necessary medical care, bruised her face, forced her to exercise to an unreasonable level, inflicted inappropriate physical discipline, and burned her. Court records showed that Christy had been in multiple custody battles between 2016 and 2017 over Emma with Emma's great-aunt and other family members. Christy and Brendan had lived with Emma in both Indiana and Smyrna, Delaware. At the time of Emma's killing, the couple had lived a mile from the Little Lass softball fields where Emma's remains would end up being found. The murder and abuse trial for Christy and Brendan is currently scheduled for July 10, 2023. If convicted, Christy faces a minimum of 15 years in prison and a maximum of life in prison without the possibility of parole, and Brendan faces up to 44 years in prison. Amori Jovia Wiggins, formerly known as Opelika Jane Doe, was a formerly unidentified murder victim whose skeletal remains were found in a trailer park in Opelika, Alabama. Her identity was not known until nearly 11 years later in January 2023. Wiggins's father, Lamar Vickerstaff, was subsequently charged with felony murder and failure to report a missing child, while her stepmother, Ruth Vickerstaff, was charged with the latter. If convicted, Lamar would face up to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole or the death penalty, and Ruth would face up to 10 years in prison. On January 28, 2012, a resident discovered a skull at Brookhaven Trailer Park in Opelika, Alabama. Police searched the surrounding area and found more remains, including a pink, long-sleeve shirt with heart buttons and ruffles nearby on a creek bank. It is unknown if that shirt belonged to the victim. Detectives determined the skull belonged to a young African-American girl, around 4 to 7 years of age. Evidence from her bones indicated she was malnourished, and she also had a visible deformity on her left eye. This could be natural or a result of injury or abuse. Forensic artists at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children created an image of what Jane Doe may have looked like. Detectives looked at school and birth records, but this yielded no results. In 2017, the University of South Florida Institute for Forensic Anthropology and Applied Science performed isotope testing on her bones, which indicated she lived in the southeastern United States. In September 2016, a former Vacation Bible School teacher at the Greater Peace Church in Opelika provided photos of a child who resembled Wiggins that were taken in the summer of 2011. She would have been 4 to 5 years old. The teacher said she had a slightly unkempt appearance and was not very clean. She had trouble communicating with other children and was quiet and stayed to herself. The teacher did not remember her name, and the church did not formally register children, so there were no records. The church was located 10 minutes from where Wiggins's remains were found. Police used software to enhance the image, hoping someone in the public would recognize the girl. The Opelika Police Department teamed up with Othram Laboratories to use advanced DNA testing and investigative genetic genealogy. Based on tips, detectives believed the unidentified child may have had ties to Orlando, Florida, southeastern Virginia, or northeastern North Carolina. In January 2022, Opelika Jane Doe's remains were sent to Othram's laboratory in the Woodlands, Texas. A DNA extract from the remains was used to build a comprehensive genealogical profile, which was uploaded to a genealogical database. In January 2023, Othram confirmed that Opelika Jane Doe had been identified as Amore Jovia Wiggins. 50-year-old Lamar Vickerstaff was identified as Amore's father in October 2022. He was born and raised in Opelika, Alabama, before he enlisted in the U.S. Navy. He also spent time in Norfolk, Virginia, Honolulu, Hawaii, and Jacksonville, Florida. In December 2022, Opelika detectives traveled to Mayport Naval Station in Jacksonville, where he was stationed at the time to notify him of his daughter's death. Vickerstaff did not provide any information to authorities regarding his daughter's identity. Vickerstaff's wife, Ruth, to whom he was married since May 2006, told detectives that she did not know who Vickerstaff's daughter was, or who her mother was. Ray Venter identified the biological mother to be Sherry Wiggins, who resided in Maryland. In December 2022, age 37, she confirmed she was the biological mother of Amore. Sherry Wiggins was a native of Norfolk and provided documentation showing that the Vickerstaffs obtained legal and physical custody of her daughter in 2009. At that time, her visitation with Amore was suspended. She also provided documents showing that she had continuously paid child support to Vickerstaff since 2009. Amore Wiggins's funeral was held on February 25, 2023 in Norfolk, Virginia. On January 17, 2023, the Vickerstaffs were arrested in Jacksonville, Florida. Lamar Vickerstaff was charged with felony murder and failure to report a missing child, and his wife Ruth was charged with the latter. They were held at the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office until their extradition to Lee County, Alabama. On March 22, 2023, a preliminary hearing was held for Lamar and Ruth Vickerstaff's cases, where Detective Alfred White revealed details about Lamar and Ruth Vickerstaff interviews with police. White said that Ruth Vickerstaff had admitted to him that she had been untruthful during her initial arrest since she didn't know what was going on. She stated that while she and Lamar had custody of Amore Wiggins, she became overwhelmed with having to take care of Amore and requested that Lamar take Amore to his family, and stated that was the final time she saw Amore. White stated that someone who knew Ruth had reported Amore's injuries prior to her death, and that during Lamar Vickerstaff's police interview, he confessed to murdering Amore, but denied inflicting the injuries which had been observed on her remains and through the church surveillance footage. He stated that he had attempted to bring Amore back to life after the murder. He also requested that Ruth not be charged in Amore's death. After the hearing, Lamar Vickerstaff was denied bail, while Ruth was granted bail and returned to Jacksonville, where she must wear an ankle monitor while she awaits trial. If convicted, Lamar Vickerstaff faces either life in prison without the possibility of parole or the death penalty, while Ruth Vickerstaff faces up to 10 years in prison. The Bear Brook murders, also referred to as the Allenstown Four, are female American murder victims discovered in 1985 and in 2000 at Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire. All four of the victims were either partially or completely skeletonized, and they were believed to have died between 1977 and 1981. In 2017, investigators named Terry Petter Rasmussen as the most likely suspect. Rasmussen's identity was confirmed via DNA from a son from his first marriage. He was also confirmed, via DNA, to be the father of a 2 to 4-year-old girl who was one of the Bear Brook victims. Rasmussen is believed to be responsible for several other murders, including that of Denise Bowden, his known girlfriend, who disappeared in 1981. Rasmussen was convicted and sentenced for the murder in 2002 of his then-wife, Eun Soon-jun. He died in prison in 2010. In 2019, the three biologically related females were identified as a mother, Marlies Elizabeth Honeychurch, and her two daughters, Marie Elizabeth Vaughn and Sarah Lynn McWatters, last seen in November 1978. The middle child, identified as Rasmussen's daughter, currently remains unidentified. Based on the date they disappeared, available documents, and Rasmussen's activities, the victims most likely died between 1978 and 1981. On November 10, 1985, a hunter found a metal 55-gallon drum near the site of a burned-down store at Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire. Inside were the bodies of an adult female and young girl, wrapped in plastic. Autopsies determined both had died of blunt force trauma. The two were buried in an Allenstown cemetery with a tombstone that read, "Here lies the mortal remains known only to God, of a woman aged 23 to 33 and a child aged 8 to 10. Their slain bodies were found on November 10, 1985, in Bear Brook State Park. May their souls find peace in God's loving care. On May 9, 2000, the remains of two young girls were found near the first discovery site. These bodies were also in a metal 55-gallon drum, and police believe that all four murders occurred at roughly the same time, despite investigators inexplicably missing the second drum in 1985. According to investigators, the reason that it took so long for the second drum to be recovered is that it was located outside the proximity of the initial crime scene. The cause of death for these children was also blunt force trauma. The adult, later identified as Honeychurch, was determined to be Caucasian with possible Native American ancestry. Her age at the time of death was estimated to be 23 to 33. She had curly or wavy brown hair and was between 5 feet 2 inches and 5 feet 7 inches in height. Her teeth showed significant dental work, including multiple fillings and 3 extractions. The 3 girls were thought to also have some Native American heritage. They had light or European American complexions. The girl found with the adult female, later identified as Vaughn, was between 5 and 11 years old. She had symptoms of pneumonia, a crooked front tooth, 2 earrings in each ear, and was between 4 feet 3 inches and 4 feet 6 inches tall. Her hair was wavy and light brown. She had no dental fillings. The middle child, currently unidentified, also had a gap between her front teeth and died at an age between 2 and 4. She had brown hair and was about 3 feet 8 inches tall. She had an overbite, which was probably noticeable. She also may have suffered from anemia. DNA proved this child was fathered by Terry Petter Rasmussen. In February 2020, it was announced that DNA analysis suggested the child was primarily Caucasian, with slight Asian, African, and Native American heritage. The organization later released an updated version of the child's facial reconstruction. The youngest girl, later identified as McWatters, was estimated to be 1 to 3 years old, had long blonde or light brown hair, was between 2 feet 1 inch and 2 feet 6 inches tall, and also had a gap between her front teeth. In the early days of the investigation, authorities publicized the case in the United States and some parts of Canada. At least 10 possible identities were ruled out. Despite hundreds of leads, the bodies were not identified. In June 2013, new versions of the victims' facial reconstructions were created by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. These versions incorporated their dental information, showing how their teeth could have affected the appearance of their faces. The reconstructions were created in black and white, as their skin tones and eye colors could not be determined. In November 2015, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released a third set of reconstructions of the 4 victims at a news conference at the New Hampshire State Attorney General's office. In 2014, police announced that DNA profiling had revealed through DNA that the woman and oldest and youngest girls were maternally related. This means that the woman could have been the girl's mother, aunt, or older sister. In 2015, the woman was identified as the mother of the 2 girls. Other forensic information showed that the woman and children lived together in the northeastern United States between 2 weeks and 3 months before their deaths. Investigators have concluded the woman and 2 of the children lived in the area where their bodies were found. Advanced forensic testing showed the 2 to 4-year-old girl, since identified as Rasmussen's daughter, probably spent most of her childhood in either the upper Northeast or upper Midwest, perhaps Wisconsin. In 2019, however, it is stated that the non-related child most likely originated from Arizona, Texas, California, or Oregon, although additional locations cannot be excluded. In January 2017, it was announced that Denise Bowden, who had been missing since 1981, was connected to the murders. Bowden disappeared from Manchester, New Hampshire, along with her young daughter and then boyfriend Robert Bob Evans. Evans later abandoned a young girl, Lisa, at a campground, and she was found to not be his daughter. Bowden was not reported missing until 2016, when her daughter resurfaced alive and well in California after there was more publicity about the murders and Bowden's disappearance. The daughter is keeping her name private. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children subsequently announced that an unidentified man, known by the alias Robert Evans, was found through DNA to be the father of the middle child, who is not related to the 3 other victims. Authorities believed that Evans was the killer of the 4 Bear Brook victims, but did not elaborate. Authorities said in 2018 that the Bear Brook woman was not Bowden. They also said that Robert Evans was a pseudonym and that the man's legal identity was unknown. Evans died in prison in December 2010. He had been convicted and sentenced as Evans for the 2002 murder and dismemberment of his wife at the time, Eunsoon Jun, a chemist in California. In June 2017, police released a video of a police interview of Evans in hopes of finding his true identity. 2 months later, Robert Evans was confirmed as Terry Petter Rasmussen through DNA testing from a DNA sample contributed by one of his sons from what is believed to be his first marriage. Born in 1943, Rasmussen was a native of Denver, Colorado. He married in 1969, had 4 children, and lived in Phoenix, Arizona, and Redwood City, California. His wife left him between 1973 and 1974, and his family last saw him around Christmas, 1974. One of his sons from this marriage provided the DNA sample that confirmed Rasmussen as Evans in June 2017. The senior Rasmussen, known as the Chameleon Killer, is believed to have used at least 5 different aliases in a decades-long run of crimes across the country, including at least 5 homicides, and likely more. On June 6, 2019, New Hampshire investigators held a press conference regarding the case and revealed the identities of 3 of the victims. Marlies Elizabeth Honeychurch, born in 1954, was the mother of Marie Elizabeth Vaughn, born in 1971, and Sarah Lynn McWatters, born in 1977, all of whom went missing from La Puente, California, around Thanksgiving of 1978, while she was dating Rasmussen. Marlies had an argument with her mother and left the residence, never contacting her relatives again. Honeychurch may have adopted the alias name Elizabeth Evans to use in legal documents during May 1980. It is believed that all 4 victims were murdered before 1981, as Rasmussen was known to have left New Hampshire after this time. Sarah's younger half-brother, who had never met her, created a post in 1999 on the Ancestry.com website in efforts to locate her. She was born in Hawaiian Gardens, California, when her father was in the Marines. Similar posts also aided in the identification of the victims. Marlies had previously married Marie's father in June 1971 and divorced by 1974. She married Sarah's father in September 1974, and the 2 were separated by the time she was known to be dating Rasmussen. The children both went through periods where they were in the custody of their fathers, but Marlies would later regain guardianship. By October 1978, Sarah's father was seeing another woman and Sarah was presumably in the care of her mother. Honeychurch and Vaughn's funeral was held in November 2019 in Allenstown, during which they were given a new headstone bearing their names. In attendance were members of Honeychurch's family and Rasmussen's daughter from his first marriage. Sarah was laid to rest in Connecticut, closer to her father's family. The fourth victim's identity is not yet known, but investigators stated that through advanced DNA testing they could confirm the child was Rasmussen's. They have so far been unable to identify who the mother of the child is and whether or not she may still be alive. In February 2020, a new rendering of the fourth victim was released by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and New Hampshire State Police.